Coming up, rent tech. Are renters being asked for too much information? The Reserve Bank leaves the door open to further rate rises, and China's economy grows more than expected. That's next. It is your daily 10-minute business and finance news wrap for this Tuesday, the 18th of April 2023. Later, the Reserve Bank paused interest rate rises in April, but for how long? But first, let's talk about rents, and the way you apply for a rental agreement has changed over the years with the use of third-party apps instead of paperwork. So what are the concerns? Rhayna Bosch spoke with Choice's Kate Bauer for more.
We use the term rent tech to refer to the various digital platforms that are run as third parties distinct from agents. That might be to apply for a rental, it might be to pay your rent, or sometimes also to maintain the rental. So to liaise with your property manager, you might request a maintenance request, or you might issue some kind of problem with your agent.
And what kind of data are they collecting?
So what we found in our report is that these platforms are requesting much more information than what's commonly collected in a traditional paper application. So for example, it's not just your standard things of like, can you service the rent? So do you have a job and what's your income? But people's full employment history, asking for employer checks where employers have been asked whether or not that person is punctual or reliable, how they behave at work, information about people's family status, their marriage certificates, the number of pets, the age of the pets, the names of the pets, how many children that they have. So really quite a large and extensive list of information. And that's in addition to a large number of identity documents that they're also being asked to upload into the platforms.
And what kind of protections, if any, are available to keep this consumer data safe?
So currently, most renters are protected to some extent by various state tenancy acts. But what we're seeing is that there's a bit of a gap in the protections in terms of the Federal Privacy Act. So what we'd like to see some stronger protections that limit the kinds of information that businesses are able to collect, and more importantly, how they're able to use that information. One of the problems for renters in this sector is that they're incentivized or sometimes pressured to hand over this information, but then they don't really have any control over how it's used once they've uploaded it to the platform.
Now, today's release also talks about some additional fees that could be incurred by renters when using these apps. Can you talk us through what those are and how they apply?
Yeah, so we found that renters were being forced to pay for all sorts of parts of the rental journey. Some people were being asked to pay fees on top of their rental payment, so to pay a monthly transaction fee just in order to pay their rent. Sometimes they were being charged excessive late fees, sometimes in excess of $15 for errors that were either part of the platform or an error of the agent and not the fault of the tenant. And those fees can really add up. Some tenants advocates have told us of people who got into financial difficulty, including owing up to a week's rent in late payment fees. We also have found that a quarter of the renters in our survey have paid for a tenancy check. So these rental platforms recommend or incentivize people to pay for these verification or tenancy checks. But these is in fact data that the agents and the platforms can access for free. So we think this is a blatant money grab.
So, Kate, can you just expand further on the relationship between the app and the agent? How exactly are they using this technology?
This is, again, one of the problems with the sector is that there's very little transparency about the relationship between the apps and the agents and how they're actually using this information to determine who's a suitable tenant. So the information that renters get when they use the platforms is to upload as much information as possible, and it's recommended to get one of these tenancy verification checks, and they're told that this will put them to the front of the queue, this will help speed up their application. But in fact, we haven't seen any evidence that that is in fact the case. And we also know that these rental platforms, some of them offer what's called a match score or a suitability score. And then that is potentially being used by the agents to determine who the best tenants are. But again, this is not a process that the tenants actually have any transparency over. They don't know if that information is correct. They don't know who gets to the top of the list. And there's obvious potential there for discrimination and bias, and renters are left with little choice or any way to question those unfair decisions.
So can tenants then opt against using these rental applications, or is that going to in some way negatively impact their application?
So that's a fear that many renters spoke to us about. We found in our survey that more than 40% of renters felt pressured to use these third-party platforms. We also spoke to a number of people in regional towns who really had difficulty finding a rental if not being able to use one of these third-party apps. So we find that this is an area where renters, in fact, have little choice, and they're quite fearful in this very difficult rental crisis that they won't be able to find a place to live. So they're incentivised to comply with the request to hand over more information than what they're comfortable with.
So we've got a larger migrant population flooding in from overseas now that the borders are open, an elderly population who may also be seeking rentals. Is this going to negatively impact them in terms of wrapping their head around the technology?
Yeah, so I think that is another one of the concerns, is the potential exclusion from these types of technologies. Not everybody is able to access the technologies. And again, some people will be more au fait with using rental platforms and using digital platforms and online forms. We did in fact find in our report that younger renters reported being pressured to use the apps more frequently and more frequently given a match score through the apps rather than others. So we don't know whether they're being used more for people who are coming into the rental market or whether or not that older people are just unable to access them at all and are potentially being cut out from housing opportunities because of that.
That is Rhayna Bosch there speaking with Kate Bauer from Choice. Let's go now to the Reserve Bank, which has released its April board meeting minutes. It left the door open to future interest rate rises, but Deloitte Access Economics is worried about the previous 10 increases. For more, I spoke earlier with Stephen Smith from Deloitte.
We're very concerned about Australia's economic outlook in 2023, and most of that concern is centred around Australia's households. So rising interest rates is one reason why, but we've also had a rental squeeze, negative real wage growth, broader cost of living pressures. So we see consumer spending going backwards in 2023, and that means a difficult time for the Australian economy.
You say that the past two rate rises were a mistake, but is that with the benefit of hindsight?
Absolutely. It's very difficult to use monetary policy, a very blunt instrument, to navigate through a period like this. In our view, the last couple of rate hikes not necessary in terms of being able to bring inflation back down, and so some extra pressure being put onto Australian households there. But it certainly is a close run thing and difficult. The RBA has a difficult job.
Still, in the Reserve Bank's board minutes released today, it did say it considered a rate rise in April. Of course, it left interest rates on hold, but sees the case for another rate rise in the next potential few meetings. What do you say to that?
Look, certainly there is the potential. We do think interest rates have peaked and should have peaked a little while ago. Inflation certainly has peaked in the December quarter and is now coming down. But it won't come down quickly, and we do expect a little bit of variability as inflation returns back down to the 2 to 3% target band. That means that there is a chance that the RBA will respond further, but we don't think that's needed, and we don't think Australian households can bear too much more from the RBA.
Stephen Smith there, partner at Deloitte Access Economics. Very quick check on the share market today. Not a lot of action over the past couple of sessions. Today, the ASX 200 down 0.33%, 7,360. That's even as China's GDP rose by 4.5%. That's better than expected in the March quarter over the year. And that's thanks to increasing retail sales and property sales. And it comes as its economy reopened following the end of its COVID-0 policies.
This SBS On The Money stream is provided for informational purposes only. The content in this stream should not be understood as constituting advice or a recommendation. It is not personal advice and it does not consider your personal circumstances or objectives. You should contact a licensed professional before making any financial decision.